Oh, we have to continue. Let's do it. Bottom page 244. From the top of the grand staircase, Shenanigan watched everyone come filing back in, shaking rain from their hair and umbrellas. It felt a lot like the first day of the reunion, though the faces were more familiar now. She sat with her legs threaded through the banisters, kicking into the air. People kept coming up to Phenomena and Felicity and shaking their hands or hugging them to their obvious discomfort. Shenanigan bared her teeth at anyone who so much as looked at her, never mind attempted to offer condolences. And in the end, her lonely lookout was ignored. Only Earth, fixed to their grand side by inheritance's sheer worry, watched her steadily with an expression of profound sympathy. Maelstrom's and Cook's faces were blank-faced and mute, but Candor and Fauna stood beside them answering questions they were too tired to answer but too kind to ignore. Shenanigan could take or leave much of her family, but she had decided, but she was glad that they were there. Candor spotted Shenanigan on her lonely perch and climbed the stairs toward her. He looked even more tired than before, but the smile he summoned for her was still crooked and bright. "Hello, Shenanigan," he said quietly. "Mind if I sit?" She didn't answer. He sat anyway. "She was very old," he said at last. "She didn't die from being old, though," said Shenanigan. Her anger throbbed dully in her throat. "She died from being murdered." Candor had nothing to say to that. They sat in silence, Shenanigan rubbing her thumb along the edge of her place card. "Who wrote these out?" she asked after a while. "Daisy. Doesn't she have the most adorable penmanship? The little loops on her F's especially." Candor began to drone on about the delightful way Daisy dotted her I's, and Shenanigan fought not to crumble the card in her hands. That was why the handwriting looked familiar. She and Phenomena had been staring at it just the night before on a strip of paper taken off the crossbow belt. All of a sudden, she was sick of sneaking around. "Phenomena and I snuck in and took the note off the crossbow bolt in Pamplemouse's body," she stated, interrupting Candor mid-flow. She ignored his gasp of horror. "We wanted to compare the killer's handwriting with our suspects." She held up the place setting. "This handwriting will match the note, I'm sure of it." "You snuck in to see the body?" Candor's soft brown eyes were wide behind his glasses. "Shenanigan." "What did you expect?" she replied. "I can't help my name after all," she added bitterly, feeling a pang. Aunt Schadenfreude would never have said that to her again. Would never say that to her again. Candor took the place card, staring at it as if he had forgotten how to read. "I didn't really get a look at the Scrabble notes, but my God, do you think the murderer forced Daisy to write for them?" Shenanigan pressed her forehead into the banister and groaned. Candor was supposed to be clever. "Listen to what I'm telling you," she said through gritted teeth. "Daisy wrote the note because Daisy killed Pamplemousse and Gumshoe." "Shenanigan." Candor took her hand in his. You've been through a lot. You just lost your aunt." "This isn't about that," said Shenanigan hotly. It was as if when a person turned 13, a little switch flipped in their brains, making it impossible for them to think properly. "I heard Daisy and Flora talking the other day. Flora was helping Daisy cover something up, and they were going on about how important it was to keep it from you. Flora said that after the reunion, Daisy wouldn't have to act anymore. They were making plans. They're in, what's that word? Cahoots." "Complicit, in league," murmured Candor automatically. The smallest seed of doubt planted itself in the furrow of Candor's brow. Then he smiled again. I'm sure this is all a mistake, but, he added over Shenanigan's protests, I'll ask her about it, if it'll make you feel better. She wouldn't lie to me. She wouldn't. Shenanigan, who could spot lies like dribbled food on a person's chin, knew you could do it to almost anyone as long as you believed it first. Candor stood up. He busied himself brushing imaginary dust off his knees. His hair hid his eyes, and when he spoke to her, his voice was strained. I'll talk to her, but you should get some rest. Go somewhere quiet with your sisters. None of you should be alone right now. Shenanigan watched him head upstairs, unsteady on his feet and shaking his head as if to clear it. She wanted to scream. She wanted to bite. She sank her teeth into one of the wooden railings in front of her and felt it give satisfyingly. She probably looked like a caged animal, which was good because it was how she felt. She went downstairs. 1 or 2 people tried to pat her arm or stroke her hair, and she snarled at them until they jumped back in alarm. She didn't know where to go. Her room still felt spoiled after the killer had been in it. The library had a bloody stain on the floor. The kitchen freezer was full of bodies. Her sisters were angry with her. In the end, she headed to the conservatory, which was green and softly noisy with the sound of growing things. She wedged herself in a nook between 2 huge plants. If she half closed her eyes, she could pretend she was in the jungle and her parents were just a few meters away, bug-bitten and happy. Something warm and furry crept into her lap. Hello, John the cat, she whispered. John the cat kneaded her legs until he deemed them comfortable, his claws snagging her trousers in the process, and then settled in to clean his paws. She wasn't sure how long she sat there, lulled by his purr. After a while, Earth came in. Shenanigan hissed at them. Earth went away. Earth returned with a plate of food and Felicity in tow. Shenanigan hissed again. She pretended she was covered in spines. She pretended she was venomous. Felicity crawled into the gap between the plants and hugged her anyway. I'm not crying, said Shenanigan as Felicity blurred. I know, she said. You cannot cry on me if you want. She stroked Shenanigan's hair and began to braid it absently. Earth shuffled into what little space remained and offered their plate with the air of someone trying to lure a frightened animal out from under a porch. None of them spoke. Earth just sat on Shenanigan's left, one sharp elbow pressed into her arm, and Felicity sat on her right, her fingers twisting gently in Felicity's hair. Eventually, Felicity said, I like your jumper. And Earth said, Thank you. It's supposed to look like a death's head moth. Phenomena poked her head around the door. Oh, we're in here. She squeezed in with her sisters and cousin. It was a very tight fit by now. She helped herself to some cake. Everyone keeps telling me how sorry they are. It's tiresome. I'd rather we all stopped moping about and got on with the investigation. What I keep coming back to is the crossbow, Phenomena mused. It's such a difficult thing to carry about. How did we not see the killer with it? Maybe now isn't the time for this, Phenomena, said Felicity gently. Our aunt is dead and we just had her funeral. Which means everyone's distracted. Perfect opportunity for investigating. Felicity and Phenomena were very different. Phenomena had a mind like a microscope, focused and clear. Of course she wanted to continue the investigation. Phenomena needed to stay busy, but Shenanigan knew that as soon as she slowed down, as soon as she could no longer distract that brilliant, busy mind from what had happened, she would crumble like dry cake. But Felicity needed to cry and hug and play with Shenanigan's hair and grieve for Aunt Schadenfreude with the people who knew and loved her. Each of them was too upset to see the other properly. Somebody had to be the first to apologize. Shenanigan rearranged some things in her head so that she could believe saying sorry first meant that you were brave rather than weak, and then she said, I'm sorry. Felicity and Phenomena looked at her as if she had grown a second, more apologetic head. Are you ill? Asked Felicity. She may have been poisoned, said Phenomena seriously. Shut up, said Shenanigan. I'm trying to fix things. Felicity, I'm sorry I called you a traitor. Phenomena, I'm sorry I ruined your case. Now, you two need to apologize to each other and also to me. She thought for a minute and then added, Earth, you're fine. You don't need to apologize for anything. Earth gave her a thumbs up with their mouthful of cake. This is worth at least 2 marks in the out of character column, said Phenomena, amused. But you're right. Felicity, I understand you have reservations, but I would like to formally ask you to join the team. You're far from useless, and we could use your help. And Shenanigan, I know the details of detective work don't come naturally to you. I shouldn't have lost my temper. Felicity threw her arms around her sisters. I love you both very much, and I'm sorry, she said simply. Hurrah, said Earth crumbly. Having siblings looks exhausting. And Earth, I'm sorry I was so rude to you at the mock-up. I'm really glad you're here, said Felicity. Oh, well, Earth blinked. Thanks. I'm glad I'm here too. John the cat leapt off Shenanigan and, with an air of satisfaction, disappeared through the cat flap. Shenanigan took the place card out of her pocket. Now, we're all a team again. I have to show you something. We need the lab. Come on. They hurried up to the attic, but as Phenomena climbed the ladder to her room, she froze. Shenanigan bumped into her, and Earth bumped into Shenanigan, and they all slid back down into Felicity, who yelped. Phenomena, she asked, what is it? Her sister's spine was rigid. Shenanigan stumbled out of the way as Phenomena collapsed against the wall and put her head in her hands. She made no sound. Phenomena? Slowly, Shenanigan climbed the ladder. When she saw the state of Phenomena's room, she wanted to put her head in her hands, too. We gotta keep reading. Chapter 26. String of Misfortunes. Looks like some broken equipment. Sometimes when Cook saw the state of Shenanigan's bedroom, she would say things like, it looks like a bomb went off in here, or, my word, it's like a hurricane swept through. She was exaggerating, because what Cook meant to say was that Shenanigan's room was very untidy. Phenomena's room, however, did look like a hurricane had hit it. There was so much broken glass everywhere that the floorboards sparkled like morning frost. Only the narrow neck of a test tube here and there indicated that it had all been Phenomena's cabinet of beakers and vials. Equipment had been hurled to the floor. Books had been pulled back from the shelves and shredded. The posters hung in tatters. The board and its list of suspects had been doused with some of Phenomena's chemicals and steamed. The only thing in the room that looked relatively undamaged was Phenomena's microscope, which was capable of surviving an actual hurricane and had merely been tipped off its bench. Shenanigan heard Felicity come up the ladder behind her and heard her soft gasp. In the center of the room was Phenomena's junior forensic kit. The dog face warped and melted. Because it was a charred cotton swab, a cinder that was once a coffee bean, a half-burnt copy of the body in the library, and a small pile of ashes that presumably used to be a handwriting sample were there. Shenanigan pawed through the ashes and found one tiny corner that remained unburnt, an OIR just visible. That was all they had left. Something rolled toward her, Phenomena's flask, half full of her solution. Shenanigan picked it up. Horribly, there was a part of her, the part that liked to snap pencils in half and draw on wallpaper, that exulted in the wreckage, that wanted to hurl the flask at the wall and splatter green goo everywhere. She pushed down the urge. From the ruins, Felicity fished out Phenomena's earmuffs and slung them around her neck. And then she and Irf rolled Phenomena's microscope onto one of the burst cushions and dragged it down the ladder. Phenomena took her hands from her face and curled them around the microscope. The evidence was all laid out on the desk, Phenomena said eventually. They didn't need to search for it. They could have just walked in and picked it up. They smashed everything because they wanted to. I'm so sorry, Phenomena, Irf said miserably. Daisy and Flora came back to the house together during the funeral, when everyone else was outside, said Shenanigan. Phenomena nodded, too dazed to respond. They tried to burn the handwriting sample, said Shenanigan, but they didn't get all of it. She took out the tiny scrap of paper and held it next to her place setting. Phenomena's eyes widened. Whose handwriting is Daisy's? It's Daisy's. That's what I was going to show you. Phenomena whipped off her glasses and squinted at the paper, eyebrows pinched. I can't be 100% certain or sure with so little to work with, but that splodge on the eye, like they stabbed the pen into the paper, is certainly similar. It's identical, insisted Shenanigan. Don't tell me you don't believe me either. You might be right, Phenomena said numbly. You might actually be right, although we will still need to prove it. The prospect of scientific rigor brought a little life back to Phenomena's eyes. And we have a secondary issue. How did they know we had this evidence in the first place? What pushed them to take action now? Shenanigan hadn't thought of that. Something must have tipped them off, Phenomena muttered. Maybe they went in to retrieve the note? That seems pretty tenuous. Shenanigan handed her sister the bottle of solution she had salvaged from the mess. Phenomena smiled and unscrewed the cap. Shenanigan braced herself for the scent of fish and broccoli, but instead she smelled something else, bitter and sweet at the same time, like a Bakewell tart. Shenanigan knocked the bottle from Phenomena's hands just before it touched her lips. Green goo splattered in an arc up the wall. Irf jerked backward, and Felicity yelled in shock. Shenanigan grabbed Phenomena's face in her hands. You didn't drink any, did you? What's wrong? Phenomena asked. So you're doing that. What's wrong? Phenomena asked, squished and bewildered. Shenanigan let her know. Phenomena, she said wildly, it smelled like almonds. They stared at the bottle. What felt like a lifetime ago, Phenomena had asked Shenanigan to check a beaker for her. She had made cyanide. She had then bottled it and labeled it neatly as she did all the chemicals in her lab and put it away. It would have been easy for anyone to come in and find the cyanide and add it to her sister's flask. Phenomena had no sense of smell. If Shenanigan hadn't been there to play her usual role as canary, Phenomena would be dead. Cook was fond of another saying, misfortunes come in threes. Clearly, she had miscounted. There had been many misfortunes over the past few days, and they were still coming thick and fast, clicking into place one after the other like beads threaded onto a string. The next came in the form of smoke rising to the top of the house, making 3 out of the 4 noses twitch. There was no discussion, just a curt go from Phenomena, and the other 3 left her in the wreckage as they ran to check out the latest catastrophe. Click. On the floor below, the secret room was ablaze. The fire, fed by all the paper, was incandescent, a word which can mean bright but also furious. It licked into the corridor where Aunt Inheritance, noticeably singed, was only kept from the blaze by Maelstrom's outstretched arm. There was a lump forming on the sides of her head, and she was glassy-eyed. "The maps!" she cried. "The machine! Our history! Maelstrom, let me go!" With the adrenaline-fueled strength that sometimes allows mothers to lift cars off their children, she tore out of Maelstrom's grasp and tried to dash into the inferno for the eek. "Gran!" Irv flung himself forward before Maelstrom could react and snatched at Inheritance's cardigan. Their heels dug into the carpet, and they were dragged toward the door. "Gran, stop! It's just paper!" Aunt Inheritance jerked. Her eyes cleared the second she saw Irv. She shrieked, "Smoke inhalation!" And with that same burst of adrenaline, she picked up her grandchild, tucked them beneath her arm like a rugby ball, and sprinted away from the fire as fast as her legs could carry her. Maelstrom heaved the door to the secret room closed, coughing. The fire had chewed the canvas to shreds, swallowing the painted pattern of the wallpaper and finally revealing to the world the door frame behind it. "It should burn itself out," he said. "Should?" asked Felicity doubtfully. "I don't know. When I got here, Inheritance was unconscious, and there was something broken on the floor." Shenanigan looked down. A large shard of one of Phenomena's beakers lay by the door frame. Most of the label was missing, but Phenomena had helpfully added a sticker of a cartoon flame with a speech bubble saying, "It's flammable." Smoke seeped around the edges of the door frame. Errant sparks blew from under the door, as if the fire were a beast behind it, snuffling. Maelstrom used an expletive that Shenanigan suspected even Cook didn't know. "We need to get a bucket chain going," he said. "Felicity, get as many people and as many vessels of water as they can carry. I'm going to block the edges of the door. That way..." Crack! Another bead slid down the string of events, but this one fell into place with a sharp noise, like Aunt Schadenfreude's stick hitting the banister. Shenanigan was running toward the sound even before it had finished disturbing the air. Oh my goodness, it's all coming together. This is called the climax of the story, kind of like the peak, when everything's kind of coming to an important spot. Whoo! I don't want to stop, but Grammy's read enough for today. We're going to stop at the bottom of 257 and pick up with chapter 27 next time. I love you. Birthday kisses. Until we read again.